Close your eyes. Let yourself drift backward through time, past the electric glow of modernity, past the smoke of industry, past the sound of church bells, until you find yourself in a world lit only by oil lamps and torch fire. The year is somewhere between the rise of Augustus and the fall of Caracalla. The city is Rome, eternal they call it, built on 7 hills and the bones of those who came before. Tonight we walk not with the senators in their gleaming togas, not with the generals crowned in laurel. We walk in the shadows, where half the population lived and died, largely unremembered. We walk with the women of ancient Rome. The cobblestones are worn smooth beneath your feet. The air carries the scent of bread baking, incense burning, and something else, something harder to name. It is the weight of lives lived quietly, powerfully, and often brutally. Come, let us begin. The first breath, the first betrayal. The midwife's hands are warm against the cold. She has done this countless times, caught new life as it slips from one world into another, held it up to the flickering light of oil lamps to see what the gods have delivered. But tonight, as she cradles the small, wet form, her face falls into practiced neutrality. It is a girl. The father paces outside, his sandals clicking against the tile floor in an anxious rhythm. He has been counting the dowry he will need to provide, counting the years until this child will leave his home for another man's, counting the sons she will never be. When the midwife emerges with downcast eyes, he already knows. "Master," she says quietly, "it is healthy." She does not say he or she. In this moment, the child's sex matters more than its breath. The law is clear, carved in stone and custom. A father has the right of life and death over his children. Patria potestas, they call it, the power of the father. With a gesture, with a word, with silence, he can decide whether this new life will see the sunrise. You are there in the shadows of the room, watching as he weighs his choice. The mother lies exhausted on the birthing couch, her body still bearing the marks of labor, her eyes fixed on the doorway where her child's fate hangs in the balance. She says nothing. She has no voice in this moment. She is, legally, a child herself in the eyes of Roman law, regardless of her age. The father looks toward the window, where the first pale light of dawn is beginning to creep across the Roman hills. Another mouth to feed, another dowry to save for, another daughter who will belong to him until the day she belongs to someone else. He nods to the midwife. The child will live. But in another home, on another night, the nod doesn't come. Instead, there is silence, and the midwife understands. She wraps the infant, barely minutes old, in a cloth and carries it out into the night. Not to the undertaker, for burial costs money, and this small life was not deemed worthy of such expense. Instead, she walks to the edge of the city, to places where the cobblestones give way to dirt paths, where the carefully maintained gardens fade into wild growth. There, she leaves the bundle. This is expositio, exposure, not murder in the minds of those who practice it, but abandonment to the will of the gods. If the child is meant to live, perhaps someone will find it. Perhaps a childless couple will take pity. Perhaps a slave trader will see profit in raising it to be sold. Perhaps wild dogs will find it first. The Romans do not consider this infanticide, not exactly. The child is not killed by human hands, merely given over to fortune, to fate, to the whims of the divine. It is a comfortable distinction that lets the city sleep. But you are there in the darkness, listening to the silence that follows. You know the statistics that will never be carved in marble or recorded in the great histories. For every 3 boys born in Rome, only 2 girls will see their first birthday. The numbers tell a story that the historians rarely do. Walk with me now through the streets of morning Rome as the sun climbs higher and the city begins to stir. Slaves hurry to market with their masters' coins. Merchants arrange their wares. Children, the ones deemed worthy of life, play in the courtyards of their homes. Notice how many of them are boys. The girls who survive that first crucial night have already learned the most fundamental lesson of their existence. Their value is conditional. They live because someone saw profit in their future, in the alliances their marriages might forge, in the sons they might one day bear, in the labor they might provide. They live not because they are wanted for themselves, but because they might be useful to someone else. In the nursery of a wealthy Roman home, you can see this truth written in the difference between how the children are treated. The boy is lifted high by his father, kissed by relatives, already spoken of in terms of the great things he will accomplish. The girl is kept to the side, tended by slaves, her future discussed in whispers about suitable matches and the dowry that must be accumulated. She is fed, certainly. She is clothed and kept warm. But she is not celebrated. From her first breath, she is being prepared, not for a life of her own, but for a life in service to others. As you watch her sleep in her wooden cradle, her tiny fingers curled into fists, you might wonder what dreams visit the minds of those so young. Does she somehow already know that her worth has been measured and found wanting? Can she sense, even in sleep, that she has been granted life not as a gift, but as a reprieve? The oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the nursery walls. Tomorrow she will wake to begin learning what it means to be a woman in Rome. She will be taught to be quiet, to be useful, to be grateful for the life she was allowed to keep. But tonight, she is just a child, breathing softly in the darkness, unaware that her first victory was simply being permitted to breathe at all. The lamp burns lower now, the shadows grow longer, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the city walls, the wind stirs through tall grass where small bundles lie silent and still, offerings to fortune that fortune declined to accept. Chapter 2. Raised in silence. The art of being invisible. Morning light filters through the narrow windows of the Roman home, casting geometric patterns across the floor where a young girl sits with her mother, learning the first and most important lesson of her life. How to disappear. Not physically, though she will learn that too. How to move through rooms without disturbing the air. How to stand in corners where shadows gather. No, this is a different kind of vanishing, more complete and more permanent. She is learning how to disappear intellectually, socially, spiritually. She is learning how to become the kind of person who exists without taking up space. Her mother's voice is soft, patient, tired. Hold your needle thus. See how the thread catches the light. Small stitches, daughter. Always small stitches. Large ones show pride, and pride is not for us. The girl is 7 years old. Her brother, 5, is in the courtyard with their father, learning to hold a wooden sword, learning to read the letters that will one day let him participate in the great conversations of the empire. But she is here, in the women's quarters, learning to make herself useful in the only ways that matter for someone like her. The afternoon grows warm. In wealthy homes throughout Rome, boys are being taught mathematics, rhetoric, philosophy, the tools they will need to navigate the world that awaits them. They memorize the speeches of Cicero, debate the philosophy of the Stoics, learn to calculate the movements of stars and the value of grain shipments. Meanwhile, their sisters learn other things. They learn to spin wool into thread, to weave thread into cloth, to cut cloth into garments, to mend what tears. They learn which herbs stop bleeding, which ones bring sleep, which ones prevent or sometimes cause pregnancy. They learn to move quietly through a house, to anticipate needs before they are spoken, to read the moods of men in the set of their shoulders, the pace of their steps. Most importantly, they learn that their thoughts are not meant to be shared. You follow one such girl through her daily lessons. Her name might be Claudia, or Julia, or Livia. The names of Roman women tell you to whom they belong, rather than who they are. She wakes before dawn to help prepare the morning meal, her small hands grinding grain into flour while her mother tends the fire. "Why must we wake so early, mother?" she asks once, her voice still thick with sleep. Her mother pauses in her work. "Because the house must be ready before the men wake. Because our comfort comes from their comfort. Because that is the way of things." But why is that the way of things? The pause is longer this time. Around them, the kitchen is warm with cooking fires, scented with bread and olive oil. Other slaves and servants move quietly about their tasks. Finally, her mother speaks again, and her voice carries something that might be sadness, might be resignation, might be fear. "Because the gods made us as we are. Because the law is what it is. Because questions like that are not for us to ask." The girl learns not to ask them again. As the months pass, you watch her education continue. While her brother learns Latin and sometimes even Greek, she learns only enough letters to read simple recipes and household accounts. While he studies the great works of literature, she memorizes the patterns of embroidery that will mark her as cultured and accomplished. But perhaps most importantly, she learns the invisible curriculum, the one never spoken aloud, but always present. She learns that when men are speaking, women listen. When men have opinions, women nod. When men make decisions, women comply. She learns that her thoughts, her feelings, her desires are not merely secondary. They are irrelevant. She learns this not through harsh words, but through 1,000 tiny demonstrations. She watches her mother defer to her father in all things, even when his judgment is clearly poor. She sees older women in the market speaking only to other women, falling silent when men approach. She observes the way conversations change when women enter a room, not becoming simpler necessarily, but becoming smaller. In the better homes, the ones with money for education, girls might learn to read more than just household accounts. They might even learn some poetry, some music. But there is always a limit, always a ceiling they must not pierce. Enough learning to be interesting, their mothers tell them, but not enough to be threatening. The girl practices her letters in the wax tablet, forming words she will never be allowed to speak in public. She learns mathematics sufficient to manage a household budget, but is never taught the complex calculations that govern trade, politics, law. She might learn to play the lyre, but will never perform except for family and friends. One evening, as oil lamps flicker throughout the house, she sits with her mother and grandmother, listening to the older women talk. Their conversation drifts from the price of grain to the health of neighbors, from the behavior of slaves to the marriages being arranged for other daughters. "What will happen to me?" the girl asks suddenly, her voice small in the lamplight. Her grandmother reaches over and smooths her hair. "You will marry a good man who can provide for you. You will bear children who will carry on his name. You will manage his household and be the mother to his sons that I was to your father." But what if I want something else? The silence that follows is not comfortable. It stretches between the 3 generations of women like a rope pulled taut. Finally, her mother speaks. "Want is a luxury we cannot afford. We are given roles to play, duties to fulfill. Happiness comes from playing them well." But in her grandmother's eyes, the girl sees something else. A flicker of memory, perhaps, of her own childhood questions, her own buried dreams. Or maybe recognition of the truth they all carry, but never speak. That this conversation, this entire educational process, is not about preparing girls for life, but about preparing them for the narrow channel through which their lives must flow. The months turn to years. The girl grows taller, her hands more skilled at the endless tasks of domestic life. She learns to preserve food for winter, to treat common ailments, to soothe crying babies and stubborn men. She learns to read the weather in the direction of the wind, and the mood of a household in the tone of voices from other rooms. But most of all, she learns to be quiet. Not just in voice, though that too. She learns to be quiet in presence, in opinion, in desire. She learns that taking up space, physical, intellectual, emotional, is a privilege reserved for others. She learns that her role is to enable, to support, to fade into the background of other people's stories. On the day she turns 12, her father announces that he has been negotiating her marriage. She is not consulted about the choice of husband, not asked about her feelings, not invited to participate in the discussions that will determine the rest of her life. She has learned her lessons well. She says nothing. The oil lamps burn low in the women's quarters. The night is deep and quiet. Somewhere in the darkness, a girl who might have been a philosopher or a physician or a poet sits with her sewing, practicing the art of being invisible, preparing for a life lived in the margins of other people's existence. She is ready now for the next lesson, the hardest one of all. Chapter 3. Sold to Men. The wedding that was a transaction. The morning of her wedding, she wakes not to joy, but to a stomach twisted with fear. She is 14 now, though she feels both ancient and impossibly young. In her dreams, she was still a child playing with wooden dolls in her mother's garden. But the woman who looks back at her from the polished bronze mirror is someone else entirely. Someone dressed in saffron yellow silk, her hair arranged in the complex style of a Roman matron, her face painted with lead powder that will, years from now, slowly poison her. You are there in the room as her mother and the household slaves prepare her for the ceremony. The air is thick with incense and unspoken fears. Her mother's hands shake slightly as she adjusts the traditional flame-colored veil that will hide her daughter's face. "Remember," her mother whispers, her voice barely audible above the bustle of a preparation, "your duty is to honor your father's choice and your husband's name. Your happiness will come from fulfilling these duties well." The girl nods, but her eyes betray her. She has never spoken to the man who will become her husband today. She has seen him twice, once from a distance at a public festival, once briefly when he came to her father's house to finalize the arrangements. He is 34 years old, a friend of her father's from the Senate. She knows nothing of his character, his temperament, his kindness or cruelty. She knows only that he has agreed to accept her father's terms. In the courtyard below, guests are already gathering. The morning air carries the scent of roasted meats and honeyed wine, the sound of laughter and conversation. This is a celebration for everyone except the person at its center. Her father enters the room, and the slaves immediately step back. He looks satisfied, prosperous even. The marriage contract has been profitable for him. His daughter's new husband comes from a wealthy family with useful political connections. The dowry her father must provide is substantial, but the alliance is worth more than gold. "You look beautiful, daughter," he says, and his voice carries genuine affection. He loves her in his way. But his love has always been secondary to his duty as a Roman father, and his duty is clear: to transfer her from his protection to another man's as advantageously as possible. She wants to speak, to ask questions, to voice fears. But her education has been thorough. She remains silent. The ceremony itself is a blur of unfamiliar rituals and ancient words. She signs the marriage contract with a hand that barely trembles, promising to honor and obey a man she does not know. She participates in the taking of auspices, the sacrificial offerings, the elaborate religious rites that will bind her to her new family as completely as chains. But it is the moment of the dowry exchange that reveals the transaction at the heart of this celebration. Her father and her new husband stand together, discussing the terms as if she were not there. So many gold coins, so many acres of farmland, so many slaves to maintain her new household. The negotiation is cordial but precise. They are transferring ownership of the property, and she is both the property being transferred and part of the payment. She is skilled in household management, her father says, as if describing a particularly useful slave. She spins and weaves beautifully, keeps excellent accounts, and has been well trained in the healing arts. Her husband nods approvingly. And her health. Excellent. She should bear you many sons. They discuss her fertility, as they might discuss the breeding potential of a prize mare. She stands between them in her saffron dress, her face hidden behind her veil, listening to herself being appraised and found satisfactory. The wedding feast that follows is magnificent. Tables groan under the weight of roasted peacock and dormice stuffed with honey, amphorae of wine from Spain and Greece, sweet pastries that dissolve on the tongue like dreams. The guests recline on couches, their conversation ranging from politics to philosophy to the latest gossip from the races. She sits beside her new husband, still veiled, still silent. Occasionally he speaks to her, brief questions about her preferences in music or food. She answers politely, carefully, aware that she is still being evaluated. As the evening deepens and the wine flows more freely, the conversation becomes more ribald. The men joke about the wedding night, about the duties of wives, about the management of households and women. She listens to herself being discussed as if she were a new horse or a piece of furniture, something useful that requires proper handling to function correctly. She seems docile enough, one of the guests remarks, and the table laughs. Docile wives are the foundation of the Republic, another adds, raising his cup in a toast. Her husband's hand rests on her shoulder, and she can feel his satisfaction. The transaction has been completed successfully. He has acquired a young, healthy, well-trained wife from a good family, along with a dowry that will enhance his own wealth and status. She has been transferred from her father's household to his as smoothly as any other piece of property. Finally, as the night reaches its crescendo, comes the moment she has been dreading since childhood. The traditional procession to her new home, where she will cease to be her father's daughter and become her husband's wife in every sense of the word. The guests form a torchlit parade through the streets of Rome. They sing traditional songs, many of them explicitly sexual, celebrating the union and the consummation to come. She walks surrounded by this drunken, jovial crowd, their faces flickering in the torchlight, their voices raised in celebration of her surrender. At the door of her new home, her husband lifts her and carries her across the threshold. This, too, is symbolic. She must not enter willingly, must not seem eager for what is about to happen. She must be taken, claimed, possessed. Inside, the house is quiet except for the distant sound of departing guests. Slaves light oil lamps in the bedroom and then disappear, leaving the new couple alone. For the first time since the ceremony began, she and her husband are truly alone together. He is not unkind. He removes her veil gently, speaks to her softly, tells her not to be afraid. But kindness cannot change the fundamental nature of what is happening. She is about to give up the last thing that belonged to her alone, her body, to a man who now owns her as completely as he owns his slaves, his horses, his furniture. Roman law is clear on this point. A wife's body belongs to her husband. She cannot refuse him, cannot deny him, cannot claim any sovereignty over her own flesh. If she fails to provide him with sexual access, he can divorce her and send her back to her father in disgrace. If she commits adultery, he can kill her with impunity. Her sexuality exists solely for his pleasure and his heirs. The oil lamps burn lower as the night progresses. When morning comes, she will begin her new life as a Roman matron, mistress of her husband's household, mother to his future sons. She will have servants to command, social duties to fulfill, a position of respect within her community. But tonight, in the flickering lamplight, she is simply a frightened girl whose childhood has ended and whose womanhood has begun with the act of being sold. Outside, Rome sleeps peacefully, secure in the knowledge that another transaction has been completed. Another young woman has been successfully transferred from one man's protection to another's. The city's stability depends on such transfers, on the orderly movement of women and wealth, from household to household, generation to generation. In the morning, the marketplace will bustle with commerce, the Senate will debate the great issues of the day, and life will continue as it always has. But for one girl, now a wife, everything has changed forever. The price has been paid. The deal is done. Chapter 4. A Slave's Life. Bodies as Property. Before dawn, while the free women of Rome still sleep in their marriage beds, she is already awake. Her feet, hardened by years of bare stone floors, carry her silently through the corridors of her master's house. There is no saffron wedding dress for her, no marriage contract, no dowry. There is only the iron collar around her neck, cold against her skin, bearing the inscription that marks her as property. I belong to Marcus Aurelius Priscus. Return me if found. Her name, if she remembers it, is lost. Her master calls her whatever pleases him. Today she is Phyllis, yesterday she was Fortunata, sometimes simply girl or you. Her identity shifts with his moods, as changeable as the weather, as permanent as morning mist. You follow her through the pre-dawn darkness as she begins her day. The kitchen fires must be lit, the bread baked, the morning meal prepared before the household wakes. Her hands move with practiced efficiency, born of necessity. Slaves who move too slowly, who fail to anticipate their master's needs, who show the slightest hesitation, are beaten, or worse. She is 18, though she might be 16 or 20. Slaves are not important enough for precise record-keeping of their births. She was born in this house to another slave woman who died in the birthing. The midwife who caught her as she entered the world held her up to the light, not to judge her worth as a daughter. but to assess her potential value as property. Female slaves serve different purposes than their male counterparts. The men work the fields, build the roads, fight in the arenas. But women like her have other uses, more intimate and more brutal. She is her master's property in every conceivable way. Her labor belongs to him. She works from before dawn until after dark, maintaining his household, serving his family, producing goods that he will sell for profit. Her children, if she has any, will belong to him as well, new slaves to replace the ones who die or grow too old to work. But most completely of all, her body belongs to him. Roman law is explicit on this point. A master may use his female slaves sexually whenever and however he pleases. She cannot refuse, cannot resist, cannot appeal to any authority for protection. If she tries to deny him access to her body, she can be beaten, tortured, or killed with no legal consequence whatsoever. You are there in the kitchen as she kneads bread dough, her movements automatic, while her mind drifts elsewhere. She has learned, like all slave women, to disappear inside herself during the worst moments, to let her body be present while her spirit flees to some distant, unreachable place. The footsteps on the stone floor make her freeze. She knows the sound of his sandals, the particular rhythm of his gait. Her master enters the kitchen alone, his wife and children still asleep, the other slaves busy with their morning tasks in distant parts of the house. She does not look up, but she feels his presence like heat from a fire. He moves behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder with casual ownership. She continues kneading the dough, her movements never faltering, though every muscle in her body has gone rigid. "You're working early today," he says, his voice conversational, almost kind. "Yes, master," she replies quietly. She has learned that the safest responses are brief, respectful, unremarkable. His hand slides from her shoulder down her back. She concentrates on the texture of the dough beneath her palms, the way it yields and reforms under pressure. She thinks about anything except what is happening. "The household accounts show good profit this month," he continues, as if they are discussing business. "Your work in the textile workshop has been particularly valuable." "Thank you, master." His touch becomes more intimate, more possessive. She closes her eyes and counts her breaths. 1, 2, 3. She has become expert at counting, at measuring time in heartbeats and exhalations until the moment passes. This is not considered rape in Roman society. Rape is a crime committed against free women, against the property of other men. But a master using his slave sexually is no different from a man riding his horse or eating fruit from his orchard. She is his possession, and he may use her as he sees fit. When it is over, he adjusts his tunic and returns to his morning routine as if nothing has happened. She finishes kneading the bread with hands that shake only slightly, then shapes it into loaves for baking. There will be no acknowledgement of what just occurred, no apology, no recognition that anything significant has taken place. If she becomes pregnant from these encounters, and many slave women do, the child will belong to her master, not to her. She might be allowed to nurse it for a few months, but then it will be taken away to be raised as future property. If the child resembles its father too closely, making his wife uncomfortable, it might be sold to a distant household or simply killed. But pregnancy is not her greatest fear. That honor belongs to the possibility that she might catch the attention of her master's wife. Roman matrons, for all their own powerlessness, hold absolute authority over the female slaves in their households, and they are not blind to their husbands' activities. Unable to challenge their husbands directly, many channel their rage and humiliation toward the slave women who have no choice but to submit. You watch as the mistress of the house enters the kitchen later that morning. She is elegant, educated, from a good family. But her eyes, when they fall on the slave girl, burn with a particular kind of hatred. The fury of a woman who knows she is being betrayed, but can only punish the victim, never the perpetrator. "You," she snaps, pointing at the slave. "Come with me." The girl follows obediently, knowing better than to show fear. In the mistress's private chamber, she endures a beating with a leather strap across her back and shoulders. The mistress strikes her with methodical precision, each blow accompanied by words of venom. "Whore, seductress, how dare you tempt my husband with your shameless behavior?" The slave says nothing, bears the punishment in silence. To protest her innocence would only enrage the mistress further. To point out that she had no choice in the matter would be unthinkable. She accepts the beating as she accepts everything else, as an inescapable reality of her existence. When it is over, she returns to her duties, moving carefully to avoid aggravating the fresh welts on her back. The other slaves see, but say nothing. They have all endured similar treatment. They all understand the particular hell of being blamed for the crimes committed against them. The day continues with its endless round of tasks. She serves the family their meals, her face composed and neutral as she places dishes before the master who used her body hours earlier and the mistress who beat her for it. She cleans the chambers, tends the fires, mends the clothing, all while her back throbs with pain. But the physical abuse is only one aspect of her suffering. Perhaps worse is the complete erasure of her humanity. She exists in the household as a function, not a person. Her thoughts, feelings, dreams, and fears are irrelevant. She is fed because hungry slaves work poorly, housed because valuable property must be protected from the elements, clothed because naked slaves disturb the neighbors. If she becomes ill, she may be treated, but not because her pain matters, only because her labor has value. If she rebels, she will be punished, not because rebellion is morally wrong, but because it damages her master's property. If she dies, she will be replaced, not because her life was meaningful, but because her function was necessary. In the evening, after the family has retired and the house has grown quiet, she lies on her straw mattress in the slave quarters. Around her, other human property sleeps restlessly, their dreams haunted by the same nightmares, their bodies bearing the same marks of use and abuse. Some nights she allows herself to remember her mother, dead these many years, but still alive in fragmented memories, a voice singing softly in an unfamiliar language, gentle hands braiding her hair, the warmth of being held not because she was useful, but simply because she was loved. But such memories are dangerous. They remind her of what she has lost, what she will never have. They make the present almost unbearable. So mostly she tries not to remember at all. Instead, she focuses on survival, on making herself valuable enough to avoid being sold to crueler masters, on staying healthy enough to continue working, on avoiding the attention of both her master and mistress whenever possible. She has no future to plan for, no hope of freedom to sustain her. She will live and die as property, her body used until it wears out, her children taken from her to continue the cycle of bondage. She will leave no trace in history, no record of her existence, no testament to her suffering. The oil lamps gutter out one by one. The great house settles into silence. And in the slave quarters, human property dreams of nothing at all, because dreams are a luxury they cannot afford. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, and the day after that, and all the days that follow, until there are no more days left to endure. Chapter 5. Bearing the burden. The price of new life. The pains begin at dawn, gripping her like iron bands around her swollen belly. She has felt them before, the false labors that have tormented her for weeks, promising relief that never comes. But these are different. These tear through her body with a relentless rhythm, like waves breaking against stone. She is 16 years old, and this is her third pregnancy. The first ended in miscarriage at 4 months, the tiny form barely human-shaped when it slipped from her body in a rush of blood and tears. The second pregnancy she carried to term, laboring for 2 days to birth a son who lived only 3 hours, his breathing growing weaker and more erratic until it simply stopped. Now, as another dawn breaks over Rome, she prays to whatever gods might listen that this child will live, will breathe, will cry with the strong voice of the healthy. But she also prays, though she would never speak this prayer aloud, that if death is coming, it will take the child and spare her. You are there in the birthing chamber as the midwife examines her with hands that have delivered hundreds of children and prepared just as many bodies for burial. The room is thick with smoke from burning herbs meant to ease pain and prevent infection. The scent of rosemary mingles with something less pleasant, the metallic smell of blood, the musky odor of a body working at the very limits of its endurance. The child is positioned well, the midwife says, her voice professionally calm. But it is large. This will not be easy. Nothing about childbirth is easy for Roman women. They face it without the benefit of pain relief beyond herbal concoctions of questionable effectiveness. They endure it without surgical intervention. Caesarean sections are performed only on dying mothers in desperate attempts to save the child. They survive it only if their bodies are strong enough, their positioning fortunate enough, their luck good enough. Many do not survive it at all. The statistics, if anyone bothered to compile them, would be sobering. Perhaps 1 woman in 10 dies in childbirth. Of those who survive, many suffer injuries that plague them for the rest of their lives. Torn muscles that never heal properly. Damaged organs. Chronic pain that makes every day a struggle. But statistics mean nothing to the woman writhing on the birthing stool, her body caught in the ancient battle between life and death that plays out in birthing chambers across the empire every day. For her, there is only this moment, this pain, this desperate effort to bring forth life while clinging to her own. The hours pass like seasons. Morning becomes afternoon, becomes evening. The midwife's assistants take turns wiping her forehead with cool cloths, offering her sips of wine mixed with herbs, murmuring encouragements that sound increasingly hollow as time stretches on. "Push now," the midwife commands, and she bears down with strength she didn't know she possessed, her body straining to expel the life within. But the child doesn't come. It is too large, or positioned wrong, or simply reluctant to leave the warm darkness of the womb for the uncertain world beyond. As night falls, complications begin. The bleeding increases beyond what is normal. Her pulse becomes rapid and thready. The midwife's face grows grim as she realizes that this birth, like so many others, may claim 2 lives instead of bringing forth 1. "Send for the physician," she instructs one of her assistants. The physician, when he arrives, is a Greek freedman with more experience than training. Roman medicine understands little about women's bodies, viewing them as fundamentally flawed versions of men's. The prevailing theory holds that the womb is a separate creature living inside women, prone to wandering about the body and causing hysteria. Treatments are often based more on superstition than science. He examines her with the confidence of someone who has never experienced what she is enduring. "The womb has grown sluggish," he declares. "We must encourage it to expel its contents." The encouragement takes the form of increasingly aggressive interventions, harsh herbs that burn her throat, massages that feel more like beatings, instruments that tear and probe while she bites down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. Through it all, she clings to consciousness by focusing on the sounds outside the birthing chamber. Her husband paces in the courtyard below, his sandals clicking against the stone in an anxious rhythm. Occasionally, his voice drifts up through the window as he speaks with friends who have come to wait with him. Their conversation centers on business, politics, the grain shipments from Egypt. Only rarely do they mention the woman laboring above, and then only to speculate about whether the child will be male. Her own thoughts drift between pain and memory. She remembers her mother describing her own births, the 3 children who lived and the 4 who didn't. "Childbirth is women's war," her mother had said. "We fight it alone, and some of us don't come home." The pain reaches a crescendo just as the oil lamps begin to gutter. With a final tearing effort that leaves her feeling as though her body has been split in 2, she feels the child slip free. For a moment, there is only silence. the terrible pregnant silence that can mean either triumph or tragedy. Then, like the cry of a small god being born, the infant's wail fills the room. A son, the midwife announces, and even her professional composure cannot entirely hide her relief. A healthy son. The child is cleaned and wrapped while she lies back against the birthing stool, her body still trembling from the ordeal. Blood pools beneath her, more than there should be, but not so much as to indicate immediate danger. She has survived. They have both survived. But survival is only the first challenge. In the days that follow, she must navigate the treacherous period of recovery while caring for a newborn whose demands never cease. Roman medicine offers little guidance for postpartum care beyond rest and the consumption of certain foods believed to restore strength. The bleeding continues for weeks, sometimes light, sometimes alarming. Her body, torn and stretched beyond recognition, heals slowly and imperfectly. Simple movements, like sitting or walking, cause shooting pains that make her gasp. Sleep becomes a luxury she can rarely afford, as the infant wakes every few hours demanding to be fed. And always there is the fear. Fear that the milk will not come, or will come, but then disappear, leaving her child to starve. Fear that fever will set in, as it did for her neighbor who died 3 days after delivering a daughter. Fear that the bleeding will suddenly worsen, that some internal injury will finally claim her life when she least expects it. But perhaps most of all, fear that she will not be strong enough for the next pregnancy. Because there will be a next pregnancy. Roman women are expected to bear children regularly throughout their fertile years. A wife who fails to produce heirs risks divorce and disgrace. One who produces only daughters faces pressure to continue trying until sons are born. The empire needs soldiers, citizens, workers, and women's bodies are the factories that produce them. She knows women who have been pregnant 10, 12, 15 times. Most of those pregnancies end in miscarriage, stillbirth, or infant death within the first year. But some survive, and those children make the suffering worthwhile. Or so she tries to tell herself. As weeks turn to months, she watches other women in her neighborhood navigate the same cycle. Pregnancy, birth, recovery, pregnancy again. Some grow worn down by the endless demands on their bodies, aging rapidly under the strain. Others seem to manage better, blessed with strong constitutions or simply better luck. But all of them live with the knowledge that each pregnancy might be their last. Not because they choose to stop bearing children, but because their bodies might finally surrender to the accumulated damage of repeated childbirth. You follow her to the market one morning when her son is 6 months old. She moves carefully, her gait still affected by injuries that never properly healed. The other women she meets there share the same cautious movements, the same haunted look around the eyes. They are veterans of the same war, survivors of battles fought in birthing chambers across the city. Their conversation, as they select vegetables and negotiate prices, touches on the things that matter most to them. Which midwife has the gentlest hands? Which herbs truly ease labor pains? Which physician can be trusted not to make things worse with his interventions? Have you heard about Marcella? One woman asks quietly. Lost the baby at 7 months. 4th time. The others shake their heads sadly. They all know women like Marcella, women whose bodies seem incapable of carrying children to term, who endure the heartbreak of loss again and again because stopping is not an option. And Livia, another adds, delivered safely, but the bleeding won't stop. Her husband is already talking about taking a second wife. This, too, is common. Men whose wives cannot produce children, or who die trying, often take additional wives or turn to their female slaves. The continuation of the family line is more important than any individual woman's life or suffering. As the mourning progresses, the conversation inevitably turns to practical matters, the sharing of knowledge that might help them survive their next ordeal. Remedies passed down from mothers and grandmothers, techniques for managing pain, warnings about physicians whose treatments do more harm than good. This informal network of women, united by shared experience and mutual vulnerability, becomes their primary source of support. Their husbands love them, perhaps, but cannot understand what they endure. Their mothers-in-law offer advice, but often remember their own experiences through the merciful haze of time. Only other women who are fighting the same war truly comprehend the stakes. She returns home, carrying her purchases and her son, her body already tired from the simple effort of walking to market and back. At home, she finds her husband reviewing his account books, planning for the future with the confidence of someone whose body will never be called upon to risk everything for the sake of new life. The child looks well, he remarks, glancing up from his calculations. Yes, she agrees. He is strong. Good. We will need sons to carry on the name. He returns to his books, already taking for granted that she will provide additional heirs as needed. She says nothing, but her hand unconsciously moves to her belly, still soft and scarred from her recent ordeal. Inside, she feels the familiar flutter that might be indigestion, might be muscle spasms from her recent trauma, or might be the first quickening of new life. She tries not to think about which possibility frightens her most. Night falls over Rome once again. In houses throughout the city, women settle into uneasy sleep, their bodies bearing the invisible wounds of their reproductive battles. Some cradle living children, temporary victories in an endless war. Others lie empty-armed, mourning losses that no one else will remember. Tomorrow will bring new pregnancies, new labors, new risks. The cycle continues because it must, because the empire demands it, because there is no choice. Women's bodies are the battleground where life and death meet, and the war never ends. In the darkness, you can almost hear it, the sound of women's breathing, shallow with pain or deep with exhaustion, marking time until the next battle begins. Chapter 6. Obey the law, the weight of Roman justice. The forum is bustling with morning commerce when she arrives, her footsteps echoing against the marble columns that tower above like silent witnesses to centuries of Roman justice. She does not walk alone. She cannot, for Roman law forbids it. Her male guardian, a distant cousin appointed by her deceased father, accompanies her with the weary expression of a man performing a tedious but necessary duty. She is 25 years old, the mother of 3 living children, the manager of a substantial household, a woman who can read and write and calculate complex accounts. But in the eyes of Roman law, she remains what she has always been, a perpetual child, incapable of independent action, forever requiring male supervision. You walk beside her through the crowds of merchants, slaves, and citizens conducting the business of empire. Around you, men debate philosophy and politics, negotiate contracts worth fortunes, settle disputes that will affect generations. But she, despite her intelligence and experience, can participate in none of it directly. She exists in the legal system not as a person, but as a category of property requiring management. Today's business is urgent, but should be simple. She needs to sell a piece of property inherited from her grandmother to pay for her eldest son's education. The property is hers by law. The need is clear, the transaction straightforward. But because she is a woman, she cannot simply walk into the forum and conduct business like any male citizen. She must petition, she must be represented, she must seek permission. Her guardian listens with barely concealed impatience as she explains the situation. He understands the finances. He is, after all, responsible for overseeing her financial affairs. But his attention is clearly elsewhere. He has his own business to attend to, his own concerns to manage. Her needs are an interruption, an obligation he fulfills with grudging competence. The price is fair, he acknowledges after reviewing the proposed sale documents. But perhaps we should wait. Property values may increase. My son's education cannot wait, she replies carefully. The best tutors will not hold places indefinitely. He sighs. Very well, but in future, discuss such matters with me before making commitments. The rebuke stings because it is unjust. She has managed her household finances flawlessly for years, has increased the value of her properties through careful investment and shrewd management. But legally, these accomplishments belong to her guardian, not to her. Her successes reflect his wise oversight. Her failures would be attributed to her inherent feminine weakness. The actual transaction takes place in a maze of legal procedures designed to protect men's interests. Multiple witnesses must attest to her identity and the legitimacy of her claim to the property. Documents must be sealed and registered. Oaths must be sworn, invoking gods and emperors. Throughout the process, she stands slightly behind her guardian, speaking only when directly addressed, deferring to his judgment, even when he clearly knows less about the details than she does. The other men involved in the transaction, the buyer, the scribes, the witnesses, address their comments to him, as if she were merely an especially intelligent slave sent to provide information. But this daily humiliation is minor compared to the legal vulnerabilities that shape every aspect of her existence. As a woman, she cannot vote, cannot hold public office, cannot serve on juries. She cannot be a witness in major criminal cases, cannot enter into contracts above a certain value without male approval, cannot adopt children or serve as a guardian to anyone else. Most crucially, she cannot control her own person. If her husband were still alive, he would have absolute legal authority over her, including the right to beat her, confine her, or even kill her if he believed she had committed adultery. Now that she is widowed, that authority has passed to her guardian, who theoretically could exercise the same powers, though social convention makes this unlikely. The law sees women as fundamentally unstable, their judgment clouded by excess emotion and physical weakness. Legal texts describe the female mind as naturally inferior, prone to hysteria and irrationality. These perceived defects make it dangerous to grant women full legal rights. They might make poor decisions, be easily deceived by unscrupulous men, or act impulsively in ways that damage family honor. You follow her from the forum to the courts, where a case is being heard that illustrates these principles in action. A woman has been accused of adultery by her husband, who seeks to divorce her and reclaim her dowry. She stands before the male judges with downcast eyes, legally forbidden from speaking in her own defense. Instead, her father speaks for her, arguing that the evidence is insufficient, that his daughter's character has always been exemplary, that the husband's accusations stem from his desire to marry a younger woman. The husband's advocate counters with testimony from slaves who claim to have witnessed suspicious behavior, with evidence of gifts given to unknown men, with arguments about the natural weakness of female virtue. Throughout the proceedings, the accused woman remains silent. Roman law recognizes that she is the person most affected by the outcome, but also holds that she is the person least qualified to influence it. Her fate will be decided entirely by men. Her husband who accuses her, her father who defends her, the judges who will determine her guilt or innocence. The case continues for hours, but the woman at its center becomes increasingly invisible, an abstract legal concept rather than a living person. The men debate her character, her actions, her motivations, but never ask her to speak. Her voice, her perspective, her truth are legally irrelevant. When judgment is finally rendered, adultery not proven, marriage to continue, she accepts the verdict with the same silence she maintained throughout the trial. Whether she is guilty or innocent, whether she loves her husband or fears him, whether she would choose to remain married or seek divorce if the choice were hers. None of these things matter under Roman law. The afternoon brings another illustration of women's legal powerlessness. In a nearby courtroom, a wealthy widow is contesting her late husband's will, which left most of his property to his male relatives rather than to her. Under Roman law, she has no automatic right to inherit from her husband. His property belongs to his bloodline, his family, his name, not to the woman who shared his bed and bore his children. Her case is stronger than most. The will was written when her husband was ill and possibly not of sound mind, and she can produce witnesses who will testify to her good management of the household finances. But even if she wins, the victory will be limited. The court might award her a larger portion of the estate. but it cannot grant her the same inheritance rights that would be automatic for a son or brother. As evening approaches, she finally completes her business and begins the walk home. The property sale has been finalized. The funds will be available for her son's education. The day's objectives have been achieved. But the cost has been more than the fees paid to scribes and witnesses. Each interaction has reinforced her legal invisibility, her dependence on male approval, her status as something less than a full person under Roman law. She has been treated with courtesy, even kindness, but always as a subordinate, always as someone whose agency is limited and whose judgment is suspect. At home, she reviews the day's events with her household slaves, planning the next day's activities, managing the complex logistics of a large domestic establishment. Here, in the private sphere, her competence is acknowledged and her decisions carry weight. The irony is not lost on her. She who cannot be trusted to sell property without male supervision is trusted to manage the daily lives of dozens of people. But private competence cannot translate into public power. Tomorrow she will wake to the same legal limitations, the same need for male intermediaries, the same systematic denial of her full humanity. She will navigate these restrictions with the skill born of a lifetime's practice. But she will never be free of them. Late at night, as oil lamps flicker in her private chamber, she sometimes allows herself to imagine what life might be like in a world where her intelligence was legally recognized, where her judgment was trusted, where her voice could be heard in the forums and courts, where decisions affecting her life are made. But such imaginings are dangerous, leading only to frustration and despair. Better to focus on what she can control, the management of her household, the education of her children, the small sphere of influence that Roman society grudgingly allows her. The moon rises over Rome, its light falling equally on marble temples and humble homes, on the forums where men make laws and the chambers where women live under them. Justice, they say, is blind. But in Rome, she also appears to be deaf to the voices of half the population. In the darkness, the sound of sandals on stone fades away, leaving only silence and the eternal weight of laws carved not in marble, but in the very structure of society itself. Chapter 7. Healing and Harm. Between medicine and magic. The pain strikes without warning, a knife twist in her belly that doubles her over as she tends the morning fires. She gasps, her hand flying to her side, and for a moment the world tilts dangerously. Around her, the kitchen slaves pause in their work, their faces reflecting the fear that always accompanies sudden illness in a world where disease can claim a life as quickly as drawing breath. "Fetch the mistress," one of them whispers, and feet hurry across stone floors while she struggles to remain upright, her body betraying her with waves of agony that steal her breath and blur her vision. When her daughter-in-law arrives, her face is already set in the expression Roman women learn early, the careful balance of concern and practicality that comes from living with the constant possibility of loss. She has buried 2 children, watched her own mother die slowly of a wasting disease, seen friends disappear overnight from fevers that modern medicine cannot explain or cure. "Send word to the physician," she instructs the slaves, then turns her attention to the suffering woman. "Come, let us get you to bed." The journey to her chamber feels endless, each step a battle against the fire in her abdomen. You follow them through corridors that suddenly seem too long, too cold, filled with shadows that might hide either healing or death. In Rome, the two often walk hand in hand. The physician, when he arrives, is a freed Greek slave who learned his trade through apprenticeship rather than formal study. Roman medicine is a mixture of practical knowledge, inherited superstition, and confident ignorance. He examines her with hands that have touched hundreds of bodies, felt for the signs that separate those who will recover from those who will not. "The womb," he declares with certainty that masks his uncertainty. It has become displaced and is pressing against other organs. This is common in women who have borne many children. His diagnosis reflects the Roman understanding of female anatomy, limited, often incorrect, but delivered with absolute authority. The womb, they believe, is a creature unto itself, capable of wandering throughout a woman's body and causing various ailments through its travels. The cure involves encouraging it to return to its proper place through a combination of treatments that seem designed as much to punish as to heal. The first remedy is bloodletting. Using a bronze blade that gleams dully in the lamplight, he opens a vein in her arm and allows her blood to flow into a bronze bowl. The theory holds that illness is caused by an imbalance of bodily humors, and that draining blood will restore proper equilibrium. She watches her life force drip steadily into the bowl, each drop carrying with it her strength, her energy, her ability to fight whatever is attacking her body from within. The physician watches too, judging by some mysterious calculus when enough blood has been taken to achieve the desired effect. But the bleeding brings no relief. If anything, the pain intensifies. And now, weakness joins the agony, making even the simple act of breathing feel like an enormous effort. The next treatment involves the application of heated cups to her back and abdomen. The cups are warmed over flames until they glow like small suns, then pressed against her skin where they create suction as they cool. The theory is that this will draw out evil humors and encourage the wandering womb to return to its proper position. The pain of the heated cups is different from the internal agony, sharp, immediate, adding new layers of suffering to an already unbearable situation. Red welts rise on her skin where the bronze touches, marking her body with the physician's attempts at healing. Still, the relief does not come. As days pass and her condition worsens, other remedies are attempted. She is given mixtures of herbs that burn her throat and twist her stomach into new knots of pain. Amulets are placed around her neck to ward off evil spirits that might be causing her illness. Prayers are offered to various gods who govern health and healing. The household women gather around her bed, sharing their own knowledge of healing arts, passed down through generations of mothers and daughters. They bring teas brewed from plants gathered in carefully tended gardens, poultices made from ingredients that have eased suffering for centuries, gentle massage techniques that sometimes succeed where aggressive medical intervention fails. "My grandmother always said," whispers one elderly slave, "that women's pain comes from the heart as much as the body." What griefs are you carrying, mistress? It is not a question the physician would think to ask. Roman medicine focuses on the physical body, treating symptoms rather than seeking deeper causes. But the women understand something that formal medical training often misses, that the body and spirit are connected, that emotional wounds can manifest as physical illness, that healing sometimes requires attention to both. She thinks about the question as another wave of pain crashes over her. What griefs is she carrying? The daughter who died in infancy, small and perfect, and gone too soon. The husband whose love turned to indifference, then to cruelty, then to absence through his early death. The sons who grew distant as they became men, seeing her as a duty to be managed rather than a person to be cherished. But such griefs are common to women. Every woman she knows carries similar burdens. If emotional pain could kill, half the women in Rome would be dead. The physician tries increasingly desperate measures. He prescribes sexual abstinence, believing that feminine passion might be inflaming her condition. When that fails to help, he reverses course and suggests that lack of sexual activity might be allowing harmful humors to accumulate. His contradictory advice reveals the fundamental uncertainty that underlies Roman medical practice. He applies leeches to drain more blood, reasoning that the previous bloodletting was insufficient. The creatures attach themselves to her skin with disgusting efficiency, swelling with her life force while she grows paler and weaker. When they are finally removed, she feels hollow, as if something essential has been drained away along with the blood. Still, the pain continues. As word of her illness spreads, other healers appear. A Syrian woman who claims knowledge of Eastern medicine brings exotic herbs and chants in languages no one recognizes. An Egyptian priest offers to intercede with gods whose names are older than Rome itself. A German slave woman suggests remedies learned from forest dwellers who have never heard of formal medicine. Each brings their own theories, their own treatments, their own confident assertions about what ails her and how it can be cured. Some of their remedies are gentler than the physician's aggressive interventions. Others are even more brutal. None brings lasting relief. The women of the household take turns sitting with her, offering comfort when medicine fails. They speak in soft voices about their own experiences with illness, their own encounters with pain that defied understanding or cure. They share stories of recoveries that seemed miraculous and deaths that came despite every effort to prevent them. Sometimes, says her daughter-in-law, holding her hand as another spasm grips her, the body knows things that we cannot understand. Sometimes it fights battles we cannot see. It is a more honest assessment than anything the physician has offered. Roman medicine, for all its elaborate theories and confident pronouncements, often cannot explain why some people recover while others die. Why treatments that work for one patient fail completely for another. Why illness sometimes disappears as mysteriously as it arrived. As weeks pass, she begins to understand that she is fighting not just illness, but the limitations of the world she lives in. The treatments available to her are based on incomplete knowledge, superstitious beliefs, and theories that have never been properly tested. The healers who attend her are doing their best with tools that are often inadequate to the task. But perhaps more frustrating than the limitations of medicine is the way her illness is interpreted through the lens of her gender. Every symptom is attributed to some dysfunction of her female nature. Her pain is dismissed as hysteria. Her weakness is seen as natural feminine fragility. Her suffering is understood not as a medical problem to be solved, but as an inevitable consequence of being born female. The physician speaks over her rather than to her, discussing her condition with male relatives who have no understanding of what she is experiencing. Her own descriptions of her symptoms are discounted as unreliable, colored by feminine emotionalism and hysteria. The men make decisions about her treatment based on their theoretical understanding rather than her lived experience. Slowly, painfully, she begins to recover. Whether because of the treatments or despite them, the fire in her belly gradually subsides. The weakness lifts. The terrible spasms become less frequent, then disappear entirely. The physician takes credit for her recovery, attributing it to the effectiveness of his bloodletting and cupping treatments. But she knows better. She recovered because her body found the strength to heal itself, not because Roman medicine provided the key to her cure. As night falls over Rome once again, she lies in her bed, listening to the sounds of a household, returning to normal rhythms. The crisis has passed, but the memory remains of pain beyond describing, of treatments that harmed as often as they helped, of a medical system that saw her as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be healed. In the darkness, she counts herself among the fortunate. She survived her encounter with Roman medicine, recovered despite its limitations, lived to see another dawn. Many women are not so lucky. The oil lamps burn low, their flames flickering like the fragile line between health and illness, life and death, hope and despair. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities for the body to betray its owner. But tonight, she breathes easily. And for now, that is enough. Chapter 8. Pleasure and Pain. The currency of flesh. The tavern sits in the shadow of the Circus Maximus, its walls stained with wine and soot, its air thick with the mingled scents of roasted meat, unwashed bodies, and something else. Something that clings to places where human dignity is bought and sold by the hour. Through the narrow windows, you can hear the distant roar of the crowd, watching gladiators die for entertainment. But here, in these dim rooms, a different kind of spectacle unfolds daily. She sits on a wooden stool in the main room, her tunic arranged to display flesh that will never truly belong to her. The fabric is thin, dyed a garish red that was once meant to be alluring, but now simply looks tired, like everything else in this place. Her name is whatever the customers want it to be. Aphrodite for the romantic ones, Lupa for those who prefer their pleasure, with a hint of danger, or simply girl for those who don't care, to pretend she's anything more than a body for hire. You watch her through eyes that have seen too much, as she scans the room with the practiced gaze of someone who must quickly assess which men are likely to pay without violence, which ones might be satisfied with less than they initially demand, which ones should be avoided entirely if possible. She is 19, though she claims to be 16 when it serves her purposes, and 22 when it doesn't. The truth has become irrelevant. One more thing she has learned to manipulate in service of survival. What matters is not who she is, but what she appears to be. Young enough to command higher prices, experienced enough to satisfy expectations, hardened enough to endure what comes next. The customers begin arriving as the sun sets. They are not the desperate or the depraved, as moralistic writers might suggest, but ordinary Roman men, merchants closing their shops for the day, soldiers on leave from distant campaigns, citizens seeking pleasure they cannot or will not request from their wives. Some are kind, some cruel, most simply indifferent. All see her as something to be used rather than someone to be known. The first customer of the evening is a wine merchant with soft hands and a gentle manner. He pays his coins to the tavern keeper, then follows her to one of the small rooms in the back. The transaction is completed quickly, professionally, without violence or unnecessary cruelty. When it is over, he adjusts his toga and returns to his normal life, while she cleans herself and prepares for the next customer. This is the reality of prostitution in Rome, not the exotic fantasy of orientalized pleasure that later ages will imagine, but a commercial transaction as mundane as buying bread or hiring a cart. The women who sell their bodies do so not because they are consumed by uncontrollable passion, but because they need money for food, shelter, clothing, because they have few other options in a society that offers limited opportunities for female independence. Some, like her, work in taverns and brothels scattered throughout the city. Others operate from their own small apartments, serving regular customers who provide a measure of economic stability. The lucky few become the mistresses of wealthy men, trading exclusive sexual access for financial security and social protection. But all of them exist outside the boundaries of respectable Roman society. They cannot marry citizens, cannot claim legal protection from abuse, cannot expect their children to be acknowledged or supported by their fathers. They occupy a strange liminal space, necessary for the functioning of Roman sexual culture, but despised for their necessity. As the evening progresses, the customers become less pleasant. A young soldier, drunk on cheap wine and battlefield stories, is rough and demanding. A middle-aged senator's son treats her with the casual cruelty of someone who has never learned to see slaves and prostitutes as fully human. An elderly freedman seeks to recapture his youth through her body, growing angry when reality fails to match his fantasies. She endures each encounter with the same detached professionalism, her mind floating somewhere above her body while men use her flesh for their pleasure. She has learned the art of disappearing inside herself, of being present enough to satisfy their demands while keeping her essential self safely hidden. Between customers, She sits with the other women who work in the tavern. They share information about dangerous clients, tips for avoiding pregnancy, remedies for the injuries that are an occupational hazard of their trade. They create their own informal network of support in a world that offers them little protection. Gaius Flavius was here last week, one of them warns. Likes to use his fists. Avoid him if you can. The Syrian merchant pays well, another adds, but he wants you to pretend you're his dead wife. Just agree, and let him talk. Such conversations reveal the hidden reality of the prostitution in Rome, that behind the commercial transaction lies a complex world of survival strategies, mutual protection, and small acts of kindness between women who understand each other's circumstances. But not all Roman women who trade sexual access for security work in brothels. In the elegant villas of the Palatine Hill, another kind of transaction takes place. Wealthy matrons trapped in loveless marriages arranged for political advantage sometimes seek comfort in the arms of gladiators, actors, or other men considered socially inferior but physically attractive. You move now to such a villa, where a senator's wife receives her lover in her private chambers, while her husband conducts business in the forum. The luxury of her surroundings cannot disguise the essential similarity to what occurs in the tavern. The trading of sexual access for something needed, whether money, protection, or simple human warmth. Her lover is a young freedman who teaches rhetoric to the sons of wealthy families. He is intelligent, cultured, attractive, and completely unsuitable for anything more than a clandestine affair. If discovered, she faces divorce, disgrace, possible death. He faces crucifixion. But the risk seems worthwhile for the moments of genuine connection they create together. Unlike the commercial transactions in the brothel, their relationship involves emotional intimacy alongside physical pleasure. They talk about literature and philosophy, share private thoughts and fears, create a small world where Roman social hierarchies temporarily cease to matter. But the danger always lurks beneath the surface. "I dreamed about you last night," she whispers, as they lie together in the afternoon sunlight, filtering through silk curtains. "Dangerous dreams," he replies, tracing patterns on her skin with gentle fingers. Dreams can be as deadly as actions if the wrong person learns of them. Their affair represents another form of female resistance to Roman sexual control. Not open rebellion, which would be suicidal, but quiet subversion. In seeking pleasure and companionship on her own terms, she asserts a kind of agency that Roman law denies her. But the risks are enormous. Roman marriage law gives husbands almost unlimited power over wives suspected of adultery. She could be beaten, divorced, exiled, or killed with minimal legal consequence. Her children could be taken from her, her dowry confiscated, her family name disgraced. As evening approaches, you return to the brothel district, where the night's business continues. The woman you observed earlier has served several more customers, each encounter leaving her a little wearier, a little more distant from her own body. Her face has settled into the mask she wears to survive. pleasant enough to attract customers, blank enough to hide her thoughts. The last customer of the night is different from the others. He is young, nervous, clearly inexperienced. This is probably his first visit to such a place, his introduction to sexual experience, coming through commercial transaction rather than romantic connection. She recognizes the type and adjusts her approach accordingly, offering gentle guidance rather than practiced seduction. When he leaves, stammering thanks and avoiding eye contact, she sits alone in the small room and counts the night's earnings. The coins are few, barely enough to pay for food and lodging, certainly not enough to save for some imagined future freedom. But they represent survival for another day. And in her world, that is victory enough. Outside, Rome sleeps fitfully, its dreams haunted by the contradictions of its sexual culture. The same society that demands female chastity creates a thriving market for female sexuality. The same laws that give husbands absolute control over wives' bodies allow those same husbands to purchase other women's bodies freely. The same moral code that condemns adultery relies on a class of women whose existence makes male adultery possible. She prepares for sleep on a narrow cot in a room barely large enough for lying down. Tomorrow will bring more customers, more transactions, more moments when she must surrender her body while protecting her soul. She has learned to find small pleasures in this life, the camaraderie of other women, occasional acts of kindness from unlikely sources, the simple satisfaction of surviving another day. But mostly, she has learned to endure, to be present when presence is required, absent when absence is safer, to navigate the narrow space between survival and destruction that defines the lives of women who exist outside the protection of Roman respectability. The oil lamps burn out one by one, leaving the district in darkness. In the silence, you can almost hear the sound of transactions continuing, money changing hands, bodies being used, dignity being bartered for survival. It is the sound of a society built on contradictions, sustained by the exploitation of those it simultaneously needs and despises. Dawn will come eventually, bringing new customers, new transactions, new opportunities for human connection to be reduced to commercial exchange. But for now, there is only darkness and rest and the small mercy of temporary peace. Chapter 9. The Exceptions. Fire and Purple. In the heart of Rome, where the Forum Romanum meets the Palatine Hill, stands a temple unlike any other. Its marble columns gleam white in the morning sun. Its sacred fire burns with flames that have not been extinguished for centuries. And within its walls lives a small group of women who exist outside every rule that governs Roman female life. They are the Vestal Virgins, and they are as close to free as any woman in the empire can be. You approach the temple as the sun climbs higher, watching as one of them emerges from the inner sanctum. She is perhaps 30 years old, her hair arranged in the complex braids that mark her sacred status, her white stola flowing around her with the dignity of someone who has never learned to make herself small. When she walks, people step aside, not with the casual dismissal they show other women, but with genuine reverence mixed with fear. She is Claudia Maxima, chief Vestal, and she wields power that most Roman men will never possess. The Vestal virgins are chosen as children, selected from patrician families when they are between 6 and 10 years old. Once chosen, they serve for 30 years, 10 years learning their duties, 10 years performing them, 10 years teaching the younger Vestals. During this time, they are legally freed from the authority of their fathers, grandfathers, or any other male guardian. They can own property, make wills, conduct business, privileges denied to every other woman in Rome. But this freedom comes at a price that most would consider unbearable: absolute chastity. A Vestal who breaks her vow of virginity faces the most terrible death Roman law provides: burial alive in an underground chamber with only a lamp, some bread, and a little water, left to die slowly in darkness. The last such execution was 15 years ago. Her name was Cornelia, and she was accused based on little more than rumors and the political needs of an emperor seeking to demonstrate his moral authority. You can still see the place where she was entombed, a small mound of earth that has become unmarked, unmourned, a reminder of the price of female independence in Rome. But today, as you watch Claudia Maxima tend the sacred fire, that terrible possibility seems distant. She moves with the confidence of someone whose authority is absolute within her domain. The sacred fire of Vesta must never be allowed to die. If it does, Rome itself will fall. This responsibility, this power over the very survival of the empire, belongs to her and her 5 companions. The flames dance before her as she performs the morning rituals, the same ceremonies her predecessors have carried out for 700 years. Her hands are steady, her voice strong as she speaks the ancient words. There is no male priest standing over her, no husband to obey, no father to please. Here, in this sacred space, she is the ultimate authority. Beyond the temple walls, her power extends into the secular world in ways that would be impossible for any other woman. She can free slaves simply by touching them. Criminals who encounter her on their way to execution are automatically pardoned. Her word can stop a gladiatorial contest. Her intervention can save a life. Emperors themselves rise when she enters a room. But perhaps most remarkably, she controls vast wealth. The Vestal virgins as a group own significant properties throughout the empire, and as chief Vestal, Claudia Maxima manages investments that would challenge the most experienced businessman. She lends money to senators, owns shares in trading ventures, makes decisions that affect the livelihoods of thousands. Yet even as you witness her exercising this extraordinary authority, the limitations remain visible. Her power exists only because she has renounced the fundamental aspects of womanhood as Rome defines them: marriage, motherhood, sexuality. She can command emperors, but she can never hold a child of her own. She can own vast estates, but she can never pass them to her descendants. She can intervene in matters of life and death, but her own life must remain forever incomplete by Roman standards. From the temple, you make your way across the city to the Palatine Hill, where another kind of exceptional woman exercises a different form of power. The imperial palace rises above Rome like a marble mountain. its corridors echoing with the footsteps of those who rule the known world. In the Empress's private chambers, you find her dictating correspondence to a Greek secretary, while slave women arrange her elaborate coiffure. She is Livia Augusta, wife of the emperor, and her influence extends from Britain to Egypt, from the Rhine to the Euphrates. But like the Vestal Virgin, her power comes with constraints that would be unthinkable for a man in her position. The grain shipments from Alexandria must be expedited, she tells her secretary. The people are restless, and empty stomachs make dangerous citizens. Her words will become imperial policy, affecting the lives of millions. She manages correspondence with governors and client kings, oversees the education of potential heirs, controls access to the emperor himself. Foreign dignitaries court her favor, knowing that her recommendation can determine the fate of nations. But her power is always exercised indirectly, always filtered through her relationship to the men who officially rule. She cannot hold military command, cannot address the Senate directly, cannot appear in public without proper male escort. Her influence is real, but invisible, effective, but unofficial. You watch as she reviews reports from her network of informants, women throughout the empire who keep her informed of local conditions, political developments, potential threats to imperial stability. Through letters carried by trusted messengers, she maintains contact with the wives and daughters of governors, senators, and client kings, creating a parallel communication system that rivals the official channels of government. The governor of Syria's wife writes that her husband grows ambitious, she notes to her secretary. Perhaps it is time for his recall to Rome. The observation will reach the emperor through seemingly casual conversation over dinner. Within months, the ambitious governor will find himself reassigned to a less important post, never knowing that his downfall began with his wife's indiscreet letter to a friend. This is how imperial women exercise power through whispered advice, strategic marriages, careful manipulation of information flow. They cannot command legions, but they can suggest which commanders should lead them. They cannot make laws, but they can influence which advisors reach the emperor's ear. As evening falls, you observe a dinner party in the imperial quarters where these invisible power structures become briefly visible. The emperor reclines at the head table, surrounded by senators and generals discussing matters of state. But watch carefully, and you will see how his wife shapes the conversation through subtle gestures, strategic questions, carefully timed observations. I have heard disturbing reports from the German frontier, she remarks during a lull in conversation. Perhaps Marcus Valerius could provide insight. The named general, thus prompted, launches into a detailed report that leads to policy decisions affecting thousands of troops. But the suggestion came from the Empress, who has been corresponding privately with the wives of frontier commanders for months, gathering information that the official reports have omitted. Later, in private, she offers more direct counsel. The people speak well of young Gaius. Perhaps it is time to consider giving him more visible responsibilities. Such conversations determine the succession, shape the future of the empire, decide who will live and who will die. But because they happen in private, because they are filtered through masculine authority, they remain officially invisible. The Empress's influence extends beyond politics into culture and society. She patronizes artists and poets, funds public works, establishes religious festivals. Through her example, she sets standards for how elite women throughout the empire should behave, dress, speak. Her preferences become fashion, her opinions become orthodoxy. But perhaps most importantly, she manages the intricate web of marriage alliances that hold the imperial court together. She arranges matches between her relatives and those of important senators, creates bonds of kinship that bind potential rivals to the imperial family, uses her daughters and nieces as living treaties to secure political loyalty. Julia must marry Lucius Cornelius, she decides, after reading intelligence reports about his family's growing influence. The alliance will secure his father's loyalty and prevent them from supporting any rival claimants. The young woman whose life she is arranging has no voice in this decision, just as the Empress herself had no voice when her own marriage was arranged decades ago. Power, even for exceptional women, exists within the same fundamental constraints that govern all Roman females. As the night deepens, you witness the loneliness that accompanies such power. The Empress sits alone in her chamber, reading reports from across the empire, making decisions that will affect millions of lives. She is surrounded by luxury unimaginable to most Romans, protected by guards who would die for her, served by dozens of devoted attendants. But she is also isolated by the very power she wields. She cannot trust completely, cannot love freely, cannot show weakness or uncertainty. Every relationship is potentially political, every conversation possibly monitored, every action scrutinized for signs of disloyalty or ambition. Like the Vestal Virgin, she has gained power by sacrificing the simple human connections that give life meaning. She has influence, but not freedom, authority, but not authenticity, respect, but not love. In the small hours before dawn, as oil lamps burn low throughout the palace, she makes a notation in her private journal. Not the official record that historians will preserve, but a personal account that reveals the human cost of exceptional female power in Rome. Today, I arranged the marriage of my grandniece to secure peace in Gaul. She wept when told of her betrothal to a man she has never met. I remember my own tears 30 years ago. The wheel turns, and we who have power use it to perpetuate the same system that once crushed us. There is no escape, only the choice between wielding power and suffering under it. Dawn breaks over Rome once more, illuminating temples and palaces where exceptional women exercise extraordinary influence. But even in their triumph, the constraints remain visible. Power purchased through renunciation, authority gained through submission to larger systems of control. The Vestal Virgin tends her sacred flame, knowing it will burn long after she is dead. The Empress shapes the destiny of nations, knowing her influence will not survive her husband's death. Both have found ways to transcend the limitations of ordinary Roman womanhood, but neither has escaped those limitations entirely. In the growing light, you can see the truth clearly. Even for the most powerful women in the world's most powerful empire, freedom remains an impossible dream. Chapter 10. Fade into stone, memory and erasure. The funeral pyre burns against the twilight sky, its flames reaching toward stars that will outlive every witness to this moment. She lies upon the wooden platform, dressed in her finest garments, her hands folded across her chest, her face peaceful in death as it rarely was in life. Around the pyre, her family gathers to perform the ancient rituals that will speed her spirit to whatever realm awaits beyond the veil of mortality. But even as the flames consume her body, another kind of erasure has already begun. You stand among the mourners as her eldest son delivers the funeral oration, his voice carrying across the gathering crowd. He speaks of her virtues, her devotion to family, her skill in household management. But listen carefully to what he doesn't say. He doesn't mention her thoughts, her dreams, her private struggles or personal triumphs. He doesn't speak of her as an individual with her own complex inner life, but as a reflection of the men she served. First her father, then her husband, finally her sons. She was the perfect wife, he declares, obedient to her husband's will, devoted to his interests, faithful to his name. She bore him 4 sons and 2 daughters, managed his household with skill, and brought honor to his lineage through her conduct. The words, meant as praise, tell a story of a life lived entirely in service to others. She is defined not by her own accomplishments, but by her success in fulfilling the roles that Roman society assigned to her. Even in death, she belongs not to herself, but to the men whose property she was in life. As the flames die down to glowing embers, you follow the mourners to the family tomb, where her ashes will be interred alongside those of her husband and ancestors. The tomb is carved with inscriptions that will preserve her memory for future generations. Or rather, will preserve a version of her memory carefully edited to conform to social expectations. Julia Tertia, the inscription reads, beloved wife of Marcus Cornelius Maximus, devoted mother of his children, exemplar of Roman virtue. She lived 42 years without giving her husband cause for complaint. 42 years of existence reduced to a handful of words that say nothing about who she really was. The inscription mentions none of her private thoughts, none of her personal struggles, none of the countless small acts of courage and creativity that filled her daily life. It speaks only of her success in avoiding behavior that would have embarrassed the men who owned her. This is how Roman women are remembered, when they are remembered at all. Their tombstones speak of their relationships to men, their success in fulfilling prescribed roles, their adherence to social norms. They are praised for what they did not do rather than what they accomplished, for their silence rather than their voice, for their invisibility rather than their presence. But most Roman women are not remembered even this much. Walk through any cemetery in the city, and you will find hundreds of graves marked only with the briefest notations. Claudia, freedwoman of Marcus, age 35. Livia, slave of Gaius Antonius, age 28. Unknown woman, found by the roadside. These minimal inscriptions reveal the stark reality of how little most women's lives mattered to the society they inhabited. They were born, they served, they died, and they vanished from history as completely as if they had never existed. Their names, when recorded at all, were often simply feminized versions of their fathers' or masters' names: Claudia, Julia, Livia, telling you to whom they belonged rather than who they were. The wealthy might commission elaborate funeral monuments, but even these focus more on displaying family status than preserving individual memory. A senator's tomb might feature detailed carved scenes of his military victories, his political offices, his public achievements. But his wife's portion of the memorial typically shows her in the traditional pose of a Roman matron, veiled, modest, surrounded by symbols of domestic virtue. You make your way through the streets of Rome as night falls, past houses where women are living and dying in anonymity, their stories untold and unrecorded. In one modest dwelling, an elderly woman sits by an oil lamp, trying to piece together fragments of her family's history. She has no written records to consult. Literacy was not considered important for women of her class. Only fading memories and oral traditions passed down through generations. My grandmother's name was, I think it was Terentia, she tells her granddaughter. Or perhaps Tertia. She came from somewhere in the south, but I cannot remember where. She died when I was young. The uncertainty in her voice reflects a larger truth about women's history in Rome. Their stories were not considered worth preserving. Their achievements were not recorded. Their perspectives were not sought or valued. They lived and died in a kind of historical silence, their experiences lost to time as surely as their bodies were lost to death. This erasure was not accidental, but systematic. Roman historians focused their attention on politics, warfare, and public affairs, realms from which women were largely excluded. When women did appear in historical accounts, it was usually as symbols or plot devices, rather than as complex human beings with their own agency and motivations. Even exceptional women, empresses, vestal virgins, the wives of famous men, were typically remembered only in relation to male-dominated narratives. Their own thoughts, feelings, and experiences were considered irrelevant to the grand sweep of historical events. But perhaps most tragically, this erasure often began while women were still alive. They were taught from childhood that their thoughts and opinions did not matter, that their role was to support and enable others rather than to achieve anything themselves. Many internalized this message so completely that they never even attempted to leave any record of their existence. In another house across the city, you observe a middle-aged woman burning a collection of letters, correspondence with friends, notes about her daily thoughts and observations, fragments of poetry she wrote in private moments. She feeds them one by one to the cooking fire, watching her words disappear in smoke and ash. "Why are you destroying those?" her daughter asks. "They are nothing important," the mother replies. "Just the scribblings of a woman. Who would care to read such things?" She has been so thoroughly convinced of her own unimportance that she actively participates in her own erasure, destroying evidence of her intellectual and emotional life because she believes it has no value. This scene is repeated countless times throughout the empire. Women's writing, when it exists, is discarded as worthless. Their artistic endeavors are dismissed as mere hobbies. Their insights and observations are forgotten because no one bothered to record them. The few women whose words do survive often owe their preservation to accident rather than intention. A letter preserved because it was found in archaeological remains. A poem copied by chance into someone else's manuscript. A legal document that happened to record a woman's voice along with more important matters. These fragmentary survivals offer tantalizing glimpses of the rich inner lives that most Roman women must have possessed, but were never allowed to express publicly. They suggest sophisticated thinking, complex emotions, creative talents that were systematically suppressed and forgotten. As dawn approaches, you find yourself in the archives where Roman records are kept, official documents, legal proceedings, military reports. Here, the systematic nature of women's erasure becomes clear. Women appear in these records primarily as property to be transferred, problems to be solved, or resources to be exploited. Their own perspectives, their own experiences of the events being recorded, are simply absent. A divorce decree records the legal dissolution of a marriage, but tells us nothing about what the woman thought or felt about losing her home, her children, her social status. A military dispatch mentions the capture of enemy women and children, but provides no insight into their experience of conquest and enslavement. A business contract involves the sale of female slaves, but records only their physical characteristics and market value, not their names, origins, or humanity. This documentary record, incomplete and biased as it is what historians must work with when trying to understand women's lives in ancient Rome. It is like trying to reconstruct a conversation when only one voice has been preserved, or understanding a relationship when only one participant's letters survive. But even as you witness this systematic erasure, you can sense the presence of what has been lost. In the spaces between the lines of official documents, in the silences of historical accounts, in the gaps where women's voices should be, their lives continue to echo faintly across the centuries. They were there, thinking, feeling, suffering, loving, creating, resisting. They experienced joy and sorrow, triumph and defeat, hope and despair. They formed friendships, raised children, managed households, pursued interests, harbored dreams. They were fully human, completely real, infinitely complex. But Roman society decided that their humanity was not worth preserving, their complexity not worth exploring, their reality not worth recording. And so they faded into stone, remembered only in abbreviated inscriptions that tell us how successfully they fulfilled the narrow roles assigned to them, if they are remembered at all. The sun rises over Rome, One final time in our journey, its light falling on marble monuments to men whose names are still known, whose deeds are still celebrated, whose words are still read. But it also falls on unmarked graves, forgotten homes, silent spaces where women lived and loved and died, without leaving any trace of their passage. In the growing light, you can almost see them, shadows moving through the streets, voices whispering in languages only partially preserved, hands reaching across the centuries to touch ours with stories that were never allowed to be told. They are still there, waiting in the silence, hoping that someday someone will remember that they were more than wives and mothers and property, that they were human beings with their own dreams, their own fears, their own complex inner lives that deserved to be recorded and honored and remembered. But the stone says nothing. The archives remain incomplete, and the silence stretches on, eternal as Rome itself. Epilogue. The weight of silence. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift forward through time, past the fall of emperors, past the rise of new faiths, past the slow collapse of marble into dust. Return to this moment, to this place, to this time, when their stories can finally be told. You have walked with them through the narrow passages of their lives. You have seen the brutality hidden behind marble facades, felt the weight of laws carved not in stone, but in human flesh. You have witnessed their strength and their suffering, their resistance and their resignation, their brief moments of triumph and their long seasons of endurance. They were our mothers in the deepest sense, not just the biological ancestors whose genes flow in our veins, but the spiritual foremothers whose struggles carved out the space where freedom might someday grow. They bore the weight of a system that denied their humanity, so that others, generations later, might know what it means to be fully human. Their names are mostly lost, their stories largely untold, but their lives mattered. Their pain was real, their love was true. Their courage, quiet though it was, changed the world in ways that marble monuments never could. In remembering them, we honor not just their memory, but our own humanity. We acknowledge that progress is not inevitable, that freedom is not free, that the rights we take for granted were paid for in the currency of human suffering. They sleep now beneath Roman earth, their struggles ended, their burdens laid down. But in the spaces between their silence, in the echoes of their unspoken words, their voices continue to whisper across the centuries. Remember us, honor us, learn from us, be worthy of the price we paid. The eternal city sleeps beneath the stars, its dreams haunted by the ghosts of those who built it, but were never allowed to claim it. In the darkness, you can hear them still, breathing, hoping, enduring. And in their endurance, finding peace at last. Sleep well, daughters of Rome. Your stories have finally been told.